We're on. I'm going to take my mask off for the talk. I hope that's okay with everyone. Just because it's going to be better that way. Oh, this mask is just making your face so hot, right? Anyways, I don't know everyone here, but thank you so much for all coming. I'm Helene Farrar. I'm going to talk for a few minutes about my show that's out here in the gallery. If you have a question while I'm talking, feel free to interject that. I'm much more interested in having a conversation than I am giving a speech. So if you do have a question about something I'm talking about, feel free just to interject that. So what I would like to talk a little bit about, first, if you had not met Nancy Davison is the curator here at the Jewish Museum. And she has brought so many wonderful artists here that have exhibited in this beautiful space. And it's really been an honor to have my work here. This show, if you can believe it, has been scheduled for 2.5 years. So she books the artists way back, and many people have asked me, I might as well share, how I happened to end up having my show here was that my friend Camille, if she's watching, Camille, this is your moment of startup. She had said to me, "You really ought to submit your work to the Jewish Museum." And I said, "Oh, I don't know if I should, and I was so scared to death to do it." And so I wrote Nancy an email, and I sent a couple images, and she called me the next day and said, "Come right in." And of course I was all like flustered. And then she said, "How Jewish are you?" And I said, "Well, I can tell you it's real Jewish." So anyways, I can talk about that more later. But it was such an honor, Nancy, so thank you so much.
I must have said that because your name sounded so...
It doesn't sound at all, yeah. No, it doesn't sound at all. That's another side of the family. So anyways, we could talk about that later, but this show is more about the work than that. So, but I do have a pretty interesting family story. So anyways, I really appreciate you coming. And if you had not had a chance, hi Tandy, and hi Suzanne. So nice to see people that have been important and influential in my life and in my art career. So the What We Carry concept came about 10 years ago. I had been, at the time, this is kind of funny, I used to play hockey. And I love to ice skate, and I love to rollerblade, and I like to ski, and I like to move, and things like that. Anyways, I used to play hockey, and we have this woman in our town that carries, and she moves around with this cart. And I found out she is not homeless, but she carries her on this cart. And one late night, I had been coming out of the hockey rink, because if you ever played hockey, or if you've been in a hockey family, you play in the morning or late at night. There's always this competition for time. And so I had come out of the hockey rink at like 10:30 at night, cold evening, like last night. And there she was in the parking lot, and my headlights kind of crossed her, and she looked up at me. So I'm going to read you a little bit about that. So last spring, I was approached by a Canadian writer who wrote this story. His name is Tom Morris, called Awakening Memory. And he found me. I'm just going to read to you a little insert about my moment in the headlights with this lady. In discussing her painting, Farrar recalls a woman in her hometown, whom she often sees pulling a rolling cart piled with things she appears to value. Farrar has tried to make eye contact with the woman, but without success. That is, until one memorable cold night when the two stare at each other through Farrar's headlights. The painting invites me to experience something of this moment of connection with the Rain Lady, with Mem, with the keeper of memories. It's a connection that feels direct, but unequivocal and perpetuous as well. So I'm going to read you a little bit more of this book. So my first painting I did in the series was this woman pulling the cart, and just a little bit more come to Maine and had seen some of my work and collected the postcard and knew this man in Ottawa, Canada, and sent him the postcard with my painting on it and said, I think you can identify with this work. So here's him talking about it sitting at his desk. It's been sitting there like a questioning presence as I've been writing this book. Farrar calls the woman in the painting the Maine lady. I often think of her as Mem, the keeper of memories. And during the past year or so, I have frequently looked up at this figure and found myself wondering, what is she carrying? What do I carry? What do you, the reader, carry? So it was kind of wild to me that Tom contacted me and he said, your painting has been sitting at my desk for a year now. Can we talk about it being in my book? And then I said, well, this sounds, I was like, sure, let's talk about this. So he sent me this book a couple months ago, and of course, he wrote, there's about 5 pages about my paintings in here, which is really, so of course I was like crying and feeling so much joy. He's like, I can't believe this is why I paint, because he kind of got it, and he could verbalize the concept. So this woman, anyways, I saw her carrying her cart, and I was thinking, what is it, if we could see what each other are carrying, whether it's emotional or stories or trauma or joy, could we be kinder to each other? You know, and so I thought, how could I show something that's not seen? How could I show something that you can't hear? So that was the kind of the idea of the story or the premise for it. So there's 2 elements in the paintings. Who's noticed there's all this like pieces, color, shapes, and so on. I was kind of playing off two concepts. One is I was thinking about a mosaic. So a mosaic are pieces put together. And this is one of my favorite authors. I'm just going to read to you just a tiny bit. Her name is Terry Tempest Williams. The title of this book is called Finding Beauty in a Broken World. And she's written wonderful books. One is called When Women Were Birds. A lot of them have a very strong environmental aspect. She's an environmentalist herself, and I relate a lot to her writing. So this is just a little piece to get the concept of the mosaic going. So she went and traveled and studied with a person who did mosaics, and she just talks a little bit about that. Mosaic became the way I perceived the world, break it up, and recreate a unity. Part of the nature of man is to recompose a unity that has been broken. In mosaic, I recreate an order of shards. So I mean, life is like that. We have all these different things that we're picking up, people we meet, life stories, our history, and we're creating like these units and these boxes. It's kind of a wild thing. So I was thinking a lot about that, but then I was also thinking a little bit about fabric. You know, what are we composed of? A sewn bit? You know, how are we dressed? What are all those fibers? So there's a lot of metaphor. There's a lot of metaphor. And I was thinking a lot about that because I have a strong family history with fiber. My grandfather was a tailor. My other grandfather was a dress designer. And when I was a kid, and these 2 kids that are here know that I teach a lot about fiber arts at my studio, though I never ever did any of it when I was in college. So I was thinking a lot about the sensibility of textile and the relationship to encaustic beeswax paint. There's a lot of parallels. They relate to each other in their sensibility. So that's kind of where all that schmutz, that stuff came for each of those pieces, is thinking about textile, is thinking about things coming together, things falling apart. So I had, if you've noticed in particular the small piece that's in the back with the elephant, some of those little pieces of wax are nearly peeling off. And so the process for making those isn't super complicated, but it's sort of using paint pieces. So the way we paint, right, paint is an odd thing, right? We have a little brush, we have a stick where we have hair on it. And then we're scrubbing it around, or we're picking up paint and we're rubbing it on a board. Well, encaustic is a little bit different because that stuff, the paint, you know, is actually a liquid, and you have to get it on really quick because it gets hard and it's cold. So the process for doing that painting is much more sculptural. You have pieces that are already cold, and you're scraping them and shaping them and almost gluing them on like a collage. So it's a very different sort. It's basically like a relief sculpture more than painting. So that's sort of a little bit, and I'll talk more about the process in a minute. So the other thing I wanted to talk a little bit about is what is the process with the encaustic. And did anybody notice when they looked at the pieces that there's areas that are these small little lines into the pictures that sort of create what in a formal sense are called contour lines, or the edges of things? What I'm doing actually is removing wax with a small tool. So when you carve into it, actually what it does is it creates sort of like a valley, and this valley can catch color. So I'm removing parts of the wax, rubbing into it oil paint or maybe another beeswax material, and then removing the surface. Very similar to intaglio printmaking or sgraffito with clay. It's working negatively in a way. You have to kind of, you have to be very confident with your line that you're going to create, that you're going to move, because you're stuck with it. But also just, you can create some very delicate linear qualities. So for me, I've always loved to draw, ever since I was a little kid. And I was super, super poor when I was a kid. So what I drew on when I was a kid was those very cheap paper plates, which are a bit like cardstock. And, you know, that was my drawing medium, was paper plates all the time. And so drawing is very much an important part of my process. So the cool thing about, oh, there's Nancy Barron back there. Hold on. The cool thing about that, you snuck right in, one of my very good friends. So the cool thing about drawing into the material is that you can create these lines that are hard to do with a wax, because wax is a liquid and you're putting it on very quickly and it's getting hard. It's very hard to get, you know, these very decided lines. And I just discovered it was really, it really spoke to me working that way, because when I was in college I was a printmaker, and so I was very familiar with it. It was sort of ingrained in me. And I'm a little, I'm not obsessive compulsive, but I do like to, scrape things down, spend lots of hours going into things and just removing stuff. So I'll spend sometimes in my studio a whole day just removing and carving into the wax. So it sort of fits my personality and the way I kind of work. So it's just part of the process. Okay, before I go into anything else, you guys are all, you're like the best students I've had in years. You're the most amount of people I've seen in years. Are there any questions? Maybe it's the most people you've seen in years. Does anybody have any questions right now about the subject or the materials? No? You're all good? Okay. So, I was going to talk not too much more. I was going to grab one or two pieces out of the show. All right. So this is one of the pieces, persistence. And one of the things that happens is when you come up with an idea, and if it's a good one, I think when you come from a variety of sources. So sometimes I would look at the news. Sometimes I would hear something about what's going on, sort of something going on with the climate and our culture. My nighttime reading I do, and I pull all those things together to come up with an idea for these images. In this one in particular, I had collected this vintage image of this woman. She was a native woman in New Mexico, and I think I held on to it for like 20 years. And I was just, sometimes ideas take a long time to be born. A very, very long time. So I think I kept the image, and I just kept thinking about her, how she was sitting, and she was so elegant and relaxed. And I was thinking with this one, I started playing off the shape of an umbrella, although it doesn't really look exactly like an umbrella, and started playing with these shards. And the irony of it, I was reading something this morning of an artist friend who posted something very vulnerable about really getting exhausted about being a parent in the pandemic. And I was like, wow, first response was, wow, she just wrote something very vulnerable on social media about what it's like to be a parent during this time period. And I was sort of like blown back by it, but I also at the same time was like, oh man, I wish I could just go hug this person. But I also on another level was how I felt so sorry, and I understand, But I think a little bit about this woman, she came to me through the paint, and she's sort of fighting a lot. But she seems to be handling it pretty well with some grace. So, I try to create a dialogue of the figures in relationship to the materials of what's going on. And, this one seems to she's got a pretty good shield. And as you can see from the top of this, I've put this one has a little bit of the three-dimensional component going on, but not as much as some of the other ones. So that's sort of the concept. So I usually would use a shape to kind of get mimicked throughout the rest of the images. I'll leave that up here for a sec. All right, let me go get one more of the little assemblages, and then if you have some questions, you can think about that. So, if you've known me for a long time, there's a lot of people who have known me for a while. Over the years, you've seen me kind of break out of the painting thing and really make something three-dimensional, like that really big elephant out there. And if you've seen my work in the last couple of years, I've made these cutout owls, and I've got now like a sea eagle going on because we're all obsessed with that bird. Currently visiting the state of Maine, and now I've got the obsession. Has anyone gone to see the sea eagles? Anyone seen it? So I do like to break from the three-dimensional and from the two-dimensional to make something three-dimensional. So the idea of the ones I've done with these boxes over the years is idea of a secret. So the idea of a secret in a drawer. See, this is just from this is an old sewing machine box. Or a piece of furniture. So it's narrow and it's not very deep. Salvador Dali used to do these paintings where he would put a chest of drawers, is what he would call it, on the beach. And it would be disfigured and the drawers would be opening and closing. And I always look at that as sort of a secret. And he, like a lot of sort of famous artists, I've been reading a lot about Robert Indiana right at the moment. There's a lot of things we don't know. That happens behind a door or happens in a drawer. And so this was the idea of playing off of that and using these. And I'm using little elements. I plan to do more of these. The other one has a little house in it. And it's about finding solace in our secrets. And you can relate to that in different ways. You might have seen the other ones out in the gallery that have, when you first come in the gallery, there are these little figures standing on these platforms, and the idea of it is they're like little bridges that are being held on to our stuff by a thread. So about 5 or so years ago, my family and I went to Costa Rica for an all-out crazy family vacation where we did the zip lining. And those of you who've met my husband knows he gets me to do all kinds of crazy things. Anyways, so we had done all kinds of wild things, and as I stood at the edge of the zip line, and my husband had gone, we're about to zip line over this ravine, my daughter had gone, and I'm feeling very nauseous because now I had to go, and I was thinking, now if someone just somehow cut that cable, down I'd be gone, and it's just that feeling of just holding on, by whatever that is. And so I've been sort of using ladders, bridges and little things like that that connect one piece to another or from one place to another. So the solace is whatever it is that you need to do to find yourself grounded or to feel better or whatever that is. So I hope you have fun looking at the pieces out in the gallery with that, and I hope there'll be more to come. I just have to keep finding interesting things that help me feed my mind. I think when you work with anything sculpturally, it's really a lot about forms. You have to find something that helps you get your brain thinking about it. I don't come up with sculptures in my head. It's just I don't work that way, but I can, if I find something interesting in a junkyard or on the side of the road, it can just get my brain stimulated to think about things. So we'll see if I can find some more secret drawers somewhere. Anyhow, I thank everybody for coming. Does anybody have any questions? Graham? Fiona? No? Yes, Nancy?
Well, I saw your work in Farmington, the first go round.
Yeah.
So this has been 5 years?
Yeah, more, yeah.
So has it, have you noticed a shift in
Yes.
the whole world's changed?
I know. Actually, I did that. I had a show with the same body of work about, it was 6 or 7 years ago. Actually, it was the same time of year, dreadfully cold out, up at the University of Farmington. It has changed. I meant to talk about that. But I don't know if I can put it into words how it's changed. I feel like, ironically, the world feels smaller. So the pieces out there with the little figures is to help people realize that we are just a small part, a small piece of the entire universe. You know, if you know, and I think the pandemic has taught us that we are connected, but in the irony of it is we're more closed in. So I keep thinking about that irony that we are sharing, the whole universe is sharing the experience of being around in a global pandemic, yet we are ironically staying more local and staying close to home. So I guess I've been playing off of that idea of that, what's going on in here, going as local as it's just inside your brain, like a mental landscape versus a physical one, because of our limitations of that. But that's such a good question. Other than that, I think I'm still digesting to think of, but I have been thinking about new pieces. And I'm working, if you are online, you can find my work on, my name is my handle on Instagram, but right now I'm working on, just right now, some drawings of these levels that you walk up stairs to get to. And there's just almost like a house, your house of your life. And we're just pulling around our house now. So I don't know, we'll see where it goes. We'll see where it goes. Yeah.
Do you journal about this stuff?
Yes. Oh yeah. Yeah, I do. I hide all my notes, but I do keep in my studio. My brain is like way too fast. I have to slow myself down, so when I'm painting, to keep myself focused, I keep a notepad for like kind of work things, like remember to update my emailing list. I keep that there, and then I keep another one, just concepts or ideas. But I do journal a lot, but I haven't in the last couple of months. But I usually do it at night before I go to bed. I write down, just little fragments of ideas. I used to spend a lot of time writing, but not as much as I used to. It ebbs and flows. But a lot of it is journal writing that gets me to think about a bigger idea.
You mentioned at the beginning about Nancy saying something about, are you Jewish?
Oh, yeah.
And you said, am
Oh,
I
yeah.
Jewish or whatever? And so I'm kind of intrigued about
Oh,
that.
yeah. So on my mom's side, and in the Jewish faith, if your mother is Jewish, there's no discussion. So my great-grandparents were Orthodox, and they came here from Austria in the late 1800s. And the next generation, which was my grandmother's generation, were also Orthodox. And they were very strict. And it was a point of contention in the family. And so my great-grandfather had 6 daughters. My grandmother was the youngest. And she was probably the most rebellious of them. So because they had grown up in such a strict household, and it wasn't just being an Orthodox Jew, it was also they were living in New York City. They lived in Brooklyn, but my family would say East New York, which is all the way in Brooklyn. It was very rough in the early 1900s. It wasn't necessarily a nice place to be. And, the family had, they were kind of resentful at my grandfather that was very strict about their diet and who they talked to and who they played with and, almost everything. He was very controlling. And the sisters, the 6 sisters, as they got older, they all kind of found their own paths with who they married and what they ended up doing. I could tell you so many. There's a very wild ride that happens after my grandmother gets out of the house and how she gets out of the house, but I don't know if you want to hear all that. But the story is that because of that strict household, and it wasn't, like I said, it wasn't just about them being Orthodox Jews, but it was also their immigrant family, and he was very concerned for their safety, and he wanted to take care of them. They had been through a lot. And the piece that's the second one in the gallery, I kind of played off this idea of what would it be like for someone who came to the United States and did not speak any English in 1892, and what that was like for his family. And so that piece, I played with, there's a house image in it, and he's the one that was a tailor. He worked in the garment district in New York City. So I think about that, what that would be like, and it got me thinking, when we had our other president and what was happening to all those dreamers, and I think that could have been my family, could have been your family. So I was thinking a lot about all those obstacles and how hard that must be. And it just, if you don't have a voice and you're an artist, the best way to use it is with your work. So I think that was my way of kind of digesting what was going on in our world then. But my mother, who died a long time ago, when we came to Maine in 1979, and we lived in Hollowell for a very short stint. And we moved to Farmington, which is really my hometown. And my mother is the founder of the Bagel and Dreidel Society of Maine. she came up with that name, so it's pretty funny. And she ran a Jewish group in Farmington, which met at the Methodist Church basically my whole life. And our family was kind of the center of things, our house, and I have very good memories of that part of my life. And there's another whole generation of story in between, but because of our family history and the angst about the religious ramifications of being Orthodox, my mom did not push onto me religious anything. And the irony of it, I used to be a singer, so I actually went to church so I could be in the choir. So I attended church even though I was not a Christian, and I sang. I was like in every singing thing possible. And so she just wanted me to have that sense of community, because to live in Farmington in the 80s and 90s, it was pretty dilute. We were as cultural as you were going to get, diversity, really. But there's so many kind of interesting, fluid things about it that's, kind of got me to where I am in terms of that. But it is always kind of a shock when I tell people that these are my roots, but it is a big part of our culture and the way I grew up. So thank you for asking.
Thank you.
Yeah. Any other questions? Yeah.
I guess more of a comment. Thanks so much for your inspiration.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I think a lot of young people and the message in the art form that would be beneficial to them. And then as you continue to speak, I'm like, do you write this all down?
I do. It's just in fragments, like a mosaic.
I heard a TED Talk, sort of.
Oh, really? Yeah. I did. When I first started making this body of work, and I don't even think I had shown it. I had done a Pachaca up in Waterville. It sort of like really, it kind of got my career off in a way. That's that 10-minute talk, and it's really like on a timer with flipping your images, and I did do that. It was pretty. If you Google my name, you could probably find it. Cool. Yeah.
Yeah, I just want to say thank you so much. So inspirational, and I wish I had it recorded.
Oh, that's good. Well, I'm putting it. Well, hopefully, we'll see how good my recording
Or general
is. But,
film.
yeah, yeah. But I don't foresee myself stopping with the series because I keep having ideas for it in my head, and they don't come to me quickly. They really don't. They sit around, they're like in my brain, in my head, in my heart. I'm thinking about this idea, and I can't find it. It's like I'm flipping through a Rolodex. You remember the old Rolodex? I'm like, okay, I'm gonna pull this piece out, and then this. And I keep a lot of journals, and I'll take a fragment out of a magazine of an image, or I'll see something, and then I'll kind of pull that piece, but they're not direct ideas. And so sometimes I have a lot of them, and then I'm dry, completely dry. I have none. So it's a strange thing, and it's a lot different than my other creative work. We didn't talk at all about the elephant. But I do like to get more material-based, cutting the wood. My nephew, who lives here in Portland, when he came to the show a couple weeks ago, he goes, Aunt Helene, did you make that too? I was like, yeah, I like to do that. So, that's fun too, to kind of think about it more three-dimensionally and play around more with materials. There was a time in my life I made a lot of artist books, which was a way of bringing in storytelling in a more direct way with text. So, yes. Oh, yes. Hi. Hi.
Way back here.
Hi.
Unfortunately, we didn't get to see your talk,
That's okay.
except for the very end.
Yeah.
And really appreciated the wonderful stories you told about your work.
Oh,
It's
good.
terrific.
Oh, good.
Unfortunately, I have a technical question.
Oh, yeah, sure.
And that is, what got you started with the encaustic?
Oh, yeah. So, great question. How did I get started in caustic? So, I've always been very intrigued with ancient mediums. And when I was a little kid, if you guys remember when King Tut's tomb was discovered, they had a huge exhibition in New York City. And my mom was super into King Tut. She went out and bought the necklaces, because what happened after that show? They started designing the theaters in the Egyptian style. They, people started wearing their hair and doing jewelry. That was a huge thing. I don't know, what was that in the late 70s, early 80s? My mom was super into the Egyptians, and I remember being very much entranced by the catalog. She went out and bought the really expensive catalog from the show. I remember it sitting on a table in our house, and I have it still. It's at my studio. It's a blue book. You kids might have seen it. And the pages are just falling out of it. And I was really obsessed with the ancient Egyptians. And that is where encaustic painting actually originally is from. And I didn't make the connection between ancient civilizations and the wax until I was just chatting with my brother a while ago. And I was like, why was I so into that? And he goes, don't you remember Mom went to that show? And I haven't seen it. And then if you just speed all the way forward until I was not really officially grown up in my eyes, I was sort of grown up. And my studio was here in Portland at Running with Scissors on their old location, which was a small building on Cove Street. And my studio mate, Susie, was using encaustic mostly to put on top of some bisqued spheres she had made. And I just saw her slapping the wax on, and the smell, we shared this big studio space, so the smell of it is very strong. And I got very intrigued by it. And at the time, there was a bunch of shows here in Portland with encaustic painting, and I just got intrigued by it, and I just started kind of messing around with it about 17 years ago, and I held off until my daughter was born. She's going on 16 now, so I took a class right as soon as she came right out. My first thing I did was I took an encaustics workshop, and I've been doing it ever since. And now it's mostly what I do. I do watercolor as well, but I'm mostly doing encaustic work now.
Thank you.
You're welcome. It's a long short, and a short long story. But it just spoke to me because of the tactileness. Really, is really what I got into. So. You guys
And the painting behind you, the carried objects or whatever are kind of angular. Is that more like the umbrella idea?
Yeah, that was just playing off of it. So I took this wedge here, and then I sort of made these pieces kind of like it. And the cool thing about using beeswax is when you're fusing, so encaustic is from a Greek word that means to burn in, encaustico. So every time you put some wax down, every layer has to connect to the one previous. So if you notice in this one, some of the shapes are prominent, but some of them are kind of blurred in. So I use a torch a lot, and so when you use the torch, once you get prolific with using the torch, you really can control it to get the sensibility you want. Whereas a heat gun is really just heating it up so you know it's not going to peel off, and that's always good too. So I made choices, Lakshman, about how I made some of those distinct shapes stand out. And I tried to play a lot with the negative shapes. So here is the negative shard, which is connecting to the positive. And, doing that, and then there's a mimic. And I always have a lot of repetition and pattern in my work. And that's also a big connection to my own family history with textile. I've always, when I was a kid, my mom thought I was going to become a textile designer. I could not stop drawing shapes and patterns. And so again, that was kind of like bringing it out. I've often thought it'd be fun if someone wanted to make a dress, print my painting onto some fabric and see how that would turn into a real textile piece. It would be cool. You'd be carrying now, more, so you'd have surface design and surface pattern. But I've always been very interested in that. So it's a way of pulling all those kind of interests I have together. Yeah. You guys are all thinking about it. I really appreciate you all coming out. I know that the weather is cold, but what a nice thing to do on a Sunday.
Yeah.
And there isn't any snow down here. There's no snow down here in Portland, which is bizarre to me.
That's a favorite thing.
Yeah. There's snow at our houses, right? But there's none down here. It's so good to see students and friends I haven't seen in a long time. Thank you so much. Such a pleasure. And I'll be here for a while if you have any more questions. And those of you I don't know, please come and introduce yourselves to me if you like. So if you want to find me online, I'm just Helene. I tell people I'm Helene from Maine, and you can tell them later I'm really from New York. But I've been here a long time. So anyways, nice to see you all. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.